Meaning of the valediction yours and see. When the valediction yours and see is used at the end of a letter, for example in Jane Austen's novel Pride and Prejudice, what is the NC standing in for? I realize that NC is shorthand for etc. or etc., but that is not the purpose of this inquiry. When yours and see is used in a valediction by a writer, letter, or novel, it is not unreasonable to expect that he or she assumes the reader will understand exactly what has been abridged, which may have been the case for 19th century readers, but it is not the case for at least this humble reader today. Is there a standard, long-winded expansion of this valediction, or are there many possible expansions? Wikipedia's entry regarding this topic is a bit terse and unsatisfactory.
According to Fowler's Dictionary of Modern English Usage, yours and see was a common letter form that preceded one's signature in a letter. There seems to be no clear answer on what it expands to, but this Google thread offers some direction. I believe this reflects much earlier usage, when in Europe letters were signed under formal expressions or respect to the person addressed in the letter, just as the opening included more respectful terms than just "dear." This formality arose in times when social hierarchy were more rigid and written communications were between persons of at the upper levels and very conscious of their relative status, so when signing a letter to a higher-ranked person it was common, and appropriate, and the omission a breach of etiquette, to sign with something like, "With greatest respect, your most humble and obedient servant." Later in that thread, a user writes, I happened on this page after a rereading of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. After seeing multiple instances of yours, etc., in one form or another appearing at the end of correspondence, I would have to agree with Myoringar's assessment of its origins. Although no expert on the matter, it would appear that yours, etc., and its variants allude to a set of standard salutations in correspondence. I have found a few examples which seem to point to this interpretation. Darcy ends a letter to Lady Catherine de Bourgh with yours sincerely, etc. A letter from Lydia to Elizabeth towards the end of the novel ends with yours, etc. Maybe meaningless, but observed nonetheless, is that the characters who share a more casual relationship, Lydia to Lizzie, Elizabeth with her aunt and uncle, ended their letters with yours, etc. Maybe this could imply that formality and the length of these endings are directly related. So in Austen's time, this valediction, and see, could have stood for anything that described the writer's relation to the recipient. However, it does not seem to expand into any one other valediction.
John S. Locke states in The Art of Correspondence, 1884. In closing a letter never subscribe yourself yours, and amp, c, and amp, c, is an abbreviation of etc., which is an abbreviation from the Latin words etc., meaning and others, or, and so forth. Forth means onward or forward. Hence there can be no propriety in saying I am yours and others, or I am respectfully yours and onward. This awkward expression is very common in business letters. Printers frequently abbreviate the complimentary closing of a letter, and to save type or time they print yours, and amp, c, which implies that the letter is closed in the usual form. Doubtless some thoughtless writer seeing this, concluded that it looked well and gave the letter an air of business despatch, hence it came into its present improper use. If Mr. Locke is correct, the appearances of and c, in Pride and Prejudice may have been nothing more than a way to reduce the required typesetting. Even though he states that and c indicates that the closing is of the usual form, there is no one usual form. For business letters he lists many possibilities. Yours truly, truly yours, respectfully yours, yours respectfully, or, if it is desired to give more emphasis, the adverb very may be added, as, very truly yours, yours very respectfully.
The last paragraph in the Google thread referred to in previous answer says, I suppose most of what I just wrote is merely conjecture. Still, one thing we can be sure about is that yours, etc., has been in use since 1813, when Pride and Prejudice was published, and one can assume that it was used further back than that. Indeed, it's used in one of the earliest English novels, Samuel Richardson's Pamela, or Virtue Rewarded. In 1739, at the request of friends who were booksellers, Richardson began writing Pamela as a letter writer, that is, as a volume of model letters for country readers unable to indite for themselves. One, of course, he ultimately turned the volume into a novel. Phrases like I am and see, from and see, and yours and see appear at the ends of a handful of letters in Pamela, while dozens of times as many letters have valedictions like your most dutiful daughter, your dutiful daughter, your dutiful daughter till death, your honest as well as dutiful daughter, your ever dutiful daughter, your most afflicted daughter, your dutiful and honest daughter, your careful but loving father and mother, your truly loving but careful father and mother, and so forth. In Pamela, the and C valedictions appear without explanation. They are relatively rare, and the correspondents are mostly Pamela and her parents, so it's difficult to draw real conclusions. It does seem clear that prolific correspondents would have little trouble interpreting I am and C in accord with formula, but that is not to say they will understand exactly what has been abridged, since there is much variability within the framework. I imagine that consulting a contemporaneous letter-writing manual is the only way to answer your question definitively. 1. Introduction, W. M. Sale, in 1958 Norton Library edition of Pamela, or Virtue Rewarded.
I am not particularly well versed in this subject, but I do think I should chance an answer here. The etc. or and C part of the valediction yours and C is a contraction for a common valedictory statement used during earlier eras of English, as stated before, when relationships between the sender and recipient were more clearly defined, the contraction being of the formal I remain, sir, your most loyal and faithful servant. Used, perhaps, even in correspondence between peers as a respectable gesture of putting oneself in the service of one's correspondent. But how did we come to yours, etc. from here? You'll notice that the form used above is yours and not your, which is used in the expanded valediction. This is because the S is contraction for servant, and as such yours etc. meant your servant, etc., most humble, loyal, faithful, sincere, and thus even the more common yours faithfully and yours sincerely used today meant I remain, sir, your most faithful servant, and I remain, sir, your most sincere servant, the former of which is used when the sender does not know the recipient in person. And thus more archaic version of yours and C would be I remain and C, which you will still find appended to some letters today. Hope this is satisfactory.
You've watched a watching Christmas day in the